Hello, David Zritsky for the Bond Experience. Welcome back. Now, you know I've long been a defender of Quantum of Solace for a lot of different reasons. I like the action, I like Bond's portrayal in there, I like the fashion and the clothes, wrist check, watch check, whatever it's called, Quantum of Solace, Omega. I like all the trappings. And I've been on a little bit of a campaign to get others out there, people like you, to give it a second chance. Give it a try, especially if you were underwhelmed the first time coming after the great Casino Royale. Didn't stand a chance, did it? And many of you have acquiesced. You've said yes. It's actually grown in appreciation over the years. So the campaign has worked. But this video is not about that. It's not about trying to convince you to watch Quantum again. It's actually to show you how complicated, how many different layers it took to create Quantum of Solace. And maybe after hearing some of the behind the scenes, some of the actions to create the movie itself, you might have a greater appreciation for it. So this is not talking about the characters. It's not talking about the lighting or the film or the sound. It's talking about what does it take to create a movie of this accord. And we've got to roll it back because research, knowledge is everything, right? Where do you get your knowledge from? Well, one of the areas I get it from is I go back to this book, Some Kind of Hero. This is the James Bond films, a remarkable story, the James Bond films by Matthew Fields and Ajay Chowdhury. Good friends of mine, good people in the Bond community. And this thing is well loved. Look at that. Look at that. That's a lot of dog earring and marks. And I keep going back to this because I did, for this discussion, go back to hear and understand better the story of Quantum of Solace. But that wasn't all. I also spoke to people that worked on the film, people like in stunts, people in special effects, people I've interviewed over the years and went back to them to talk about Quantum of Solace. So what I'm going to talk to you today is some things that you may not have known, some things you may know, and maybe, again, end this with a greater appreciation of this movie that I've been pitching for all these years. So let's start, because one thing that you have to understand is at the end of Casino Royale, people were flying high. I mean, Amy Pascal, the leader at Sony, was incredibly happy. The relationship was collegial, as Michael G. Wilson would say, and strong. And they were like, well, how do we do it again? And by the way, can we do it again so soon that it harkens back to the Connery era? What do I mean by that? Well, Casino Royale came out in 2006. They wanted a film to come out 1 year later. That's a tall order. They had no director on hand and they started shopping around and felt, well, 1 year too soon. 2 years maybe. Maybe we could have it in May of 2008, but we need to find the right director. And they actually went for an art house director, which is like, boom. Now you have to understand that the search for a director always comes back to the story. First you build a story, then you find a director, then you find an actor, so on and so forth. That's usually the order, and this was no difference. So Wade and Purvis, the writers, put together a story about really looking at Bond from within. Looking at Bond seeking revenge. He's a broken man at the end of Casino Royale, as we know, and he's seeking revenge. But in that revenge, he has this betrayal that's weighing so heavily on him. So he also has to search for himself and not just the target of his revenge. Purvis and Wade put together this sequel where Bond would be searching for Yusuf. Yusuf is Vesper's boyfriend in Casino Royale, the one that is basically hanging like a Damocles sword over her head, the reason why she's doing all these nefarious things to Bond. And instead of Yusuf being this kidnapped individual that's being held, no, he's really pulling the strings. He's the man behind these things. And Bond, in this story that they created, and this is why we could have gotten a very, very different Quantum of Solace, Bond had to follow the breadcrumbs, had to literally like spy and intrigue and clues, sort of a detective, had to follow the breadcrumbs to find Yusuf within this organization and what it was all about. The story itself was scripted in such a way that it was a little bit less bombastic and globetrotting and a little bit more of a thinking man's James Bond and a psychological Bond and a revenge-motivated Bond. So they wanted to find a director that could be a little bit more art house and bring out the character of James Bond. Not necessarily action-oriented, but a little bit more character-oriented. And they came upon Roger Mitchell. Now, Roger Mitchell, that may sound very familiar. Mind you, I didn't say Mark Forster yet. That's right, we could have had a very different director. Roger Mitchell directed Notting Hill, and he's known as an actor's director. He really knows how to bring out the best in a character and an actor and weave those together with a really great story. Very successful gentleman in and of itself. And he was nervous. He was offered the job and he was like, what? Me? Why? And as things started to roll along and they sort of ran out of road, he got nervous about a couple things. Number one, Bond is a juggernaut. It's huge. In fact, one of the very first visits that he went to on Pinewood was at the tail end of Casino Royale, and he visited with the director, and he also met people that were building a video game based on a film, the next film that they had no script for, and he's like, this is not how I'm used to working. And then he saw the timeline and he's like, my gosh, this is going to be incredibly short. I just don't know if I can do this. So he received a little bit of feedback from different places. And finally, he went back to Barbara Broccoli and Michael G. Wilson and said the words that he never thought he would say, no to a James Bond film. So they had to scramble very quickly. And they scrambled, they did, to the tune of Mark Forster. Now, Mark Forster, Wade of Purvis and Wade had actually met him at a party, really fell in love with, again, his art house sensibilities, his way of filming, kind of the quirkiness that he could bring to some of his films. And he approached him, and Mark Forster again questioned why. You know, he makes these $20 to $40 million films. He's perfectly fine doing that. He has full autonomy. Why would he share in this creative ability? And that's when his family came along. And I don't mean his literal family, like put a ring on it family. I mean his movie family. He told Barbara Broccoli basically, listen, you have your own Bond family. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to go to my family, the people that film with me with all my films, and really surround myself with people I'm comfortable with, especially with a short timing. And they said, are you crazy, man? Are you crazy? Don't even think about saying no to a Bond film. This is a once-in-a-lifetime dream. In fact, many of them said, this is our childhood fantasy, is to direct and be a part of creating a Bond film with all of its warts and all. Now, the scary part of this was Mark said, okay, I'll do it, but I want to bring in Paul Haggis as a writer. And Paul Haggis, who originally said no, came on board with literally 1 week to go until a writer's strike. Now, this is a portion that we all hear. We all hear about the writer's strike. But the writer's strike is important because already this film, had no title, by the way, going into filming, it really needed a lot of sussing. And this is where the whole idea of this could have been a very different Bond film goes in a lot of different directions. I mean, first of all, you had Purvis and Wade. They had written a script really about torture and grittiness. In fact, there was one scene that they had written in there where Yusef is being tortured by Bond to get the information. I mean, this is a really dark moment in Bond, and I think I would have liked that. I mean, I like the dark moments in this movie where you see that darker side and you're like, David, didn't you just do a video where you like the fun and frivolity of Bond? I like it intermixed. I like it all. I'm a typical Bond fan, right? I want it all on the table. But I do. I like that whole grittiness of this, of looking for this mysterious guy named Dante. There was a Dante in there that was like this crime boss. So they had a sort of, Bond had to keep going higher and higher up into this organization to find Yusef and then torture him, to find Dante and torture him and to find the big boss. And it's almost like a video game. But then Haggis had pulled it back because he saw a script that was entirely different than that. He saw a script that was from the original director that talked about a maniacal individual that could control the internet, that could shut down the internet, like literally like planes falling from the sky type maniacal, which I think would have been cool. A little bit larger, over the top, hearkening back to Blofeld and volcanoes and, dare I say, controlling the weather like Drax. I mean, someone that can control the internet, that's a good, meaty, almost fun Bond story that people could get around. But Hagris was like, no, 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 no. We're going to go back. We're going to go back to the core of Bond. And he had Bond actually going and following the trail of Vesper, and it leading to a very interesting discovery that Vesper, and this is something you may not have known in this story, Vesper was going to have a child. Not by Bond. This isn't No Time to Die, but by Yusuf. And that's what was being hung over her head. It wasn't Yusuf, the boyfriend, that was being hung over the head. It was this child at this orphanage. And Bond rescues the child or gets the child. And then Bond at the end is seen walking away. And it was going to be this whole thing called Sleep of the Dead. And the whole idea was that Bond is a broken individual. Bond is such a broken individual that he has to seek revenge and find out what was driving Vesper so much, because it was the only way to let her sleep, to let her be at peace, Sleep of the Dead. But alas, they didn't like the title. They didn't like the whole orphanage. They scrapped that in lieu of the story that we have today. And it was actually Barbara Broccoli. A lot of notoriety around Daniel Craig came up. Craig came up with the Quantum of Solace title. It was actually Barbara Broccoli, taking it from the short story, of course. Now, that would have been enough as far as talking about this, but then with the writer's strike, it was only Mark Forster and Daniel Craig. Mark Forster said we were kind of in trouble, and well, Daniel Craig said it in a little bit more of a blunt instrument way. He said we're basically, we're. So being in that, they tweaked and reiterated the story, and they wanted to make it a little bit hearkening back to a mother-son relationship with M. And there is, at the core of this movie, you could watch it and just appreciate it. Let it wash over you that there is a mother and son dichotomy going on here. And what I mean is, at the end of Casino Royale, Bond doesn't trust the female gender at all. He's been betrayed, the highest betrayal. Maybe he's been betrayed all his career in life, but this is the big one. This is the big one, 007. But M, in really being Bond's guide and Sherpa and helping him through Quantum of Solace to be successful and to work through this and to trust him, he then learns to be a trusting of her. He trusts her, and then he claws his way back. That brokenness that he has of being betrayed, he actually finds solace, quantum of it, in working with M as the mother. So if you squint, if you go into it from a psychological standpoint, you may see Quantum of Solace from a different point of view. What are you, Obi-Wan, David? No, from a different point of view of the mother and son relationship. Now, one thing you probably couldn't have known, and this could have been a very different moment, and I think maybe even an enhancing moment in Quantum of Solace is, did you know that they were ready and set to film Ava Green back on the set as Vesper Lynd in flashback? They weren't going to have her come back alive like she was faking her death or anything strange like that. No, it was basically to have Bond thinking back to her, or even stories about her being recounted with Yusuf. In fact, she did come back for one day on the set to do a little bit of filming and photography. For example, for this picture that you see very briefly in the beginning. Now, this is when Bond is talking to M in the safe house in Siena, and he steals the picture. That's the one day on set. And of course, Bond is going through all the pictures that are in the file, right? They've got all these things, etc., all the people. But yeah, that's literally her one day on set. But they were thinking about having this kind of haunting memory and storytelling, and I think that would have just added to it. Anything that adds to the the exploration of Bond as a character. And this is what I've always loved about this film. I know people think it's like the more tactical, or the bells and whistles, as Amy Pascal from Sony says, the bells and whistles of Bond that we Bond fans love and adore when we see a certain trope or hear a certain sound. It's not that. It is that out of all the Bond movies, and I'm going to say something very controversial here, to me, Quantum of Solace is probably the best psychological exploration of James Bond, and certainly of Craig's Bond, across the board. It does. It really gets into his broken nature, how dark he can be, how driven he can be, how tenacious he is. What does he think about betrayal? How does it drive him to be a better agent in the end? That whole remark at the end of, "I never left." He is drawn and he is propelled by duty, and that sense never truly left him. And once he was this broken individual, he still stays fractured, but he's not completely broken. Being a fractured and fallible individual means that you can be an anti-hero, that you're driven by something, you're driven by emotion. And I think this film pays it off. And let's not forget that this film was peppered by challenges, not just the writer's strike, but there were location issues galore. For example, they had lots of issues with the Aston Martin, some of them driving off into Lake Garda, some of them crashing, some of them people being hurt. I mean, there were at least 3 incidences just with Aston Martins that went on, but this is the part of movie making, and they were all emotionally connected to the people doing that. I mean, that's how these things run, but the reality is that this is the film that we've ended up with through all the challenges. One of them being a sticking point for probably most of you. When you think Quantum of Solace and you think of issues that people have, what is the first thing that comes to mind? One word. I'm sorry, you in the back. Editing, right? Editing. Everybody's like, with the editing. And by the way, it was a challenge with Mark Forster. Mark Forster is used to a minimum of 14 weeks. And he even cited, for example, Christopher Nolan, his Dark Knight movie that he took a year to edit. A year to edit. What did Mark Forster had to edit Quantum of Solace? He had 6 weeks. Not 14 weeks, not a year, 6 weeks to do it, which is nearly insurmountable. So things, he even says, mea culpa, mea culpa. He says things are going to give, he's going to have to do without, things are going to be a bit choppy, and this is the film we have. Now, relate all that aside, we have to go back to the what ifs, because that's what this film's all about. What could have been the film that we had received? What if? And the other big what if is we have to talk about the music. Now, I would never replace David Arnold. If I could, I would have David Arnold. I think he's the new John Barry on every Bond film going forward. And in this film, he had an amazing opportunity. This was his last Bond film until the stoppage, right? But he had none other than Amy Winehouse. It wasn't Jack Black and Alicia White. It was Amy Winehouse that he was working with. Now, for various reasons to which we won't even get into, because who knows what the real reason is. Only people closest to it. So I'm not even going to speculate, but we know what Amy Winehouse was going through at the time. And then, of course, she passed away. But that would have been amazing. Her sound and her ballady. I mean, that's like Shirley Bassey. Bassey. Oh, I'm going to get hate mail for that. That's that type of a level, a legendary sound. I would have absolutely embraced that. If we had Amy Winehouse do the opening, it would have, first of all, been a very different song, as we know. I mean, David Arnold has already said, and he's put out there, that there was a song, there was music that he put to it. You can find that on YouTube all day long. But to have Amy Winehouse associated with it would have been an amazing movie. All right, so the way I want to round out this video is just a couple of conclusions. Now, there is a question out there. Are you a slide whistle guy or you're not a slide whistle guy? And what they're really asking is, in general, would you change a part of a Bond movie just because you think it doesn't work? And they're hearkening back to the slide whistle in The Man with the Golden Gun. I think, like great literary works, you don't change what the artist had in mind. So for Quantum of Solace, although we can look to see what it could have been with all these options and challenges and opportunities, what could Quantum of Solace been, I wouldn't have changed it. I would still accept it for what it is today. But I will tell you something, that I believe there is another movie here. I think that there are shots and scenes that have been filmed that could have been added to this to really create a more cohesive story, and maybe even a film that was embraced by more people. However, in the meantime, I'm going to keep defending, I'm going to keep championing Quantum of Solace, because I think it's like a layer cake. An amazing layer cake with all these different layers that you can explore behind the scenes, on the screen, with fashion and style, amongst your friends, through characters. Quantum of Solace, it's a complicated film, and it's probably one of the reasons why I enjoy it so much. Give it another look. Oh, there I go. Campaigning for it again. There we are. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this. Another way of thinking about Quantum of Solace. And in the meantime, this has been David Zaritsky for the Bond Experience. We'll see you real soon. Take care. Thanks for watching this episode. If you want to be up on the latest from the Bond Experience, just click on this subscribe and subscribe to our channel. You're going to get all the latest and greatest information, plus some exclusive content. And by the way, speaking of content, here's something especially for you, just because we know you. Talk to you soon.